Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they betrayed you in the worst way imaginable? Maybe you're watching this from California or Texas or wherever you call home, thinking that could never happen to you. That's what I thought too. But trust me, the moment you see your own face staring back at you from photos you never consented to, photos taken in your most vulnerable state, your entire world tilts sideways. That's where my story begins. In a stranger's office, looking at images that should never have existed, realizing the doctor I trusted had violated me in ways I was only beginning to understand. 3 weeks earlier, Camila Reeves had sat in Dr. Raymond Chin's examination room, her hands twisting in her lap as she tried to calm the anxiety that had plagued her for days. The health scare had turned out to be minor, nothing life-threatening, but it had required a thorough examination. Dr. Chin had been recommended by her insurance company, highly rated online, with an office in one of Chicago's nicer medical buildings. She had moved to the city 6 months ago, desperate for a fresh start after her relationship with Marcus had deteriorated into something controlling and suffocating. Chicago was supposed to be her clean slate, a place where no one knew her history, where she could rebuild herself from the ground up. At 24, she was still young enough to start over, or at least that's what she told herself during the lonely nights in her studio apartment. Dr. Chun had been professional during that appointment, his manner clinical and detached in the way doctors often were. When he explained that he needed to photograph the affected area for her medical records, Camila had felt uncomfortable but hadn't questioned it. He was a doctor. This was a medical office. The photos were for her file, he said, standard procedure for tracking treatment progress. She remembered the cold air of the examination room, the way the paper gown crinkled when she moved, the clinical smell of antiseptic that seemed to coat the back of her throat. She had stared at the ceiling tiles while he took the photos, counting the small perforations in each square, trying to think about anything except how exposed she felt. He had been quick about it, efficient, already moving on to discussing treatment options before she had even processed what had just happened. Trust, she had learned the hard way with Marcus, was something precious and easily broken. But doctors were different, weren't they? They took oaths. They had ethics boards and regulations. So she had pushed down her discomfort and convinced herself she was being paranoid, that this was normal medical practice, and her unease was just residual anxiety from all the controlling behavior she had endured with her ex. Now, 3 weeks later, Camila stood in the doorway of an office that definitely was not her doctor's, staring at a manila folder splayed open on an expensive mahogany desk, and every instinct she had was screaming that her discomfort had been justified. The day had started normally enough. She had been working late at Sterling Marketing, the mid-sized firm where she coordinated social media campaigns for their retail clients. Her boss had asked her to deliver a contract to a new client's office, some businessman who wanted everything handled immediately and in person. The address was in the Loop, one of those gleaming towers where the elevator buttons only went to certain floors if you had the right key card. The security guard had sent her to the 42nd floor, but when Camila stepped out of the elevator, nothing looked like a typical office reception area. The hallway was too quiet, too elegant, with artwork that looked expensive and lighting that was more ambient than functional. She had walked past several closed doors before finding one slightly ajar, lights spilling into the dim corridor. She had knocked, called out a tentative hello, and when no one answered, pushed the door open a few more inches. The office was clearly occupied, papers scattered across the desk, a computer screen glowing, a suit jacket draped over the back of the leather chair. And that manila folder, open and obvious, with photographs that made her breath catch in her throat. Her own face stared back at her from the top photo. Not a casual snapshot or a professional headshot, but an image taken in Dr. Chen's examination room, the angle and lighting distinctly medical. Below it were more photos, each one more invasive than the last, showing her in various stages of that examination she had trusted was private and professional. Camila's vision swam. Her hands went numb. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. Those photos were supposed to be in her medical file, locked away behind privacy laws and professional ethics. How were they here, in some random office, displayed like they were just another business document? She heard footsteps behind her in the hallway but couldn't move, couldn't look away from the evidence of her violation. A man's voice, deep and carrying an edge of authority, spoke from somewhere behind her. Is there something I can help you with? Camila spun around, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The man standing in the doorway was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair styled with that careless perfection that suggested both money and attention to detail. He wore an expensive suit, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, the kind tailored so precisely it moved with him like a second skin. His face was striking, all sharp angles and olive skin, with eyes that were an unusual shade of green-gray, like storm clouds over the ocean. But it was the way he carried himself that made Camila's throat tighten. This was a man used to command, to having his presence acknowledged and respected. Power radiated from him in a way that had nothing to do with physical strength and everything to do with the certainty that he controlled whatever room he entered. Those storm cloud eyes flicked past her to the open folder on his desk, and something shifted in his expression. Not guilt exactly, but a sharp calculation, like he was rapidly assessing a situation that had just become complicated. Camila found her voice, though it came out shaking and too high. Those are my photos. Those are mine. How do you have those? The man moved into the office with a measured calm that was somehow more frightening than if he had rushed or shown surprise. He closed the door behind him with a quiet click that made Camila acutely aware she was now trapped in a room with a stranger who possessed intimate images of her that should never have left her doctor's office. I need you to stay calm, he said, his voice steady and controlled. I know this looks bad, but I'm not who you think I am. Camila's back hit the wall beside the desk as she tried to put distance between them. Her mind was racing, cycling through possibilities that all ended badly. Was he working with Dr. Chin? Was this some kind of blackmail operation? Had her photos been sold, distributed, shared with God knew how many people? I'm calling the police, she said, fumbling for her phone with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I don't know what kind of sick operation you're running, but those photos were taken without my real consent, and you have no right to them. The man held up both hands in a gesture that was probably meant to be calming, but only made Camila's panic spike higher. If you call the police right now, you will put yourself in more danger than you can imagine. Please, just give me 5 minutes to explain. Danger? Camila's laugh came out slightly hysterical. You have illegal photos of me, and you're threatening me with danger? I'm not threatening you. The man's voice dropped lower, more urgent. I'm trying to protect you. My name is Dante Moretti, and I've been investigating your doctor for the past 8 months. Dr. Raymond Chun is running an exploitation ring. He takes photos of patients without proper consent, then sells them to private buyers. You're not his only victim, and now that you've seen these, his organization is going to know someone's looking into his operation. Camila stared at him, trying to process words that didn't make sense. Exploitation ring. Private buyers. Other victims. Her doctor, with his professional demeanor and medical credentials, was selling photos of vulnerable patients? No, she said, shaking her head hard enough to make her vision blur. No, that's not possible. He's a doctor. He has reviews online. He's licensed. He's a predator, Dante said flatly. And he's very good at hiding it. I've been tracking him since I discovered what he did to someone I cared about. I have evidence, documentation, testimony from other women who trusted him the same way you did. The certainty in his voice cut through Camila's denial. She looked at the folder again, really looked at it this time, and saw that there were other documents mixed in with her photos. Medical billing records, names she didn't recognize, what looked like financial transactions. If you're investigating him, why do you have my photos? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Why would you have something that should be evidence? I acquired copies from one of his buyers, Dante said, and there was something dark and dangerous in his tone that made Camila believe he was telling the truth about not being the original source. I've been building a case, documenting the network. Your photos appeared in my investigation 3 days ago. I was trying to identify you so I could warn you before Chin realized someone had accessed this particular buyer's files. Camila's legs felt weak. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her delivery folder forgotten somewhere near the door. Other buyers. A network. Her mind couldn't quite grasp the scope of what he was describing. How many? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How many people have seen me? Dante's expression darkened, and for a moment Camila saw genuine anger break through his controlled demeanor. I don't know yet. The buyer I took these from is just one piece of the operation. But I promise you, I will find every single person involved and make sure they face consequences. There was something in the way he said consequences that suggested he wasn't talking about legal repercussions. Camila should probably be frightened by that, should recognize the implicit threat of violence in his tone. Instead, she felt a bitter surge of satisfaction that someone, anyone, wanted to hurt the people who had hurt her. Why? She asked, meeting those storm gray eyes directly. Why do you care? If you're not a cop, if you're just some businessman, why would you spend 8 months investigating a doctor's exploitation ring? Dante was quiet for a long moment, something painful flickering across his face before he locked it down. Because 2 years ago, the same thing happened to my younger sister. She went to a doctor she trusted. He violated that trust, and when she discovered what he'd done, the shame of it destroyed her. She couldn't handle knowing those images existed, couldn't bear the thought of who might have seen them. She took her own life 3 months after the photos were taken. The raw grief in his voice was unmistakable. Camila felt her own pain reflected back at her, amplified and given shape by his loss. She understood then that this wasn't some abstract investigation for him. This was personal. This was about a sister he hadn't been able to save. "I'm sorry," she said, inadequate words for an impossible situation. Dante shook his head sharply. "Don't apologize. Just let me help you." Chin's network includes some very dangerous people, people with money and power who will do anything to protect their activities. Now that you've seen these files, if Chin finds out, he'll consider you a threat. You need protection until I can shut this entire operation down. Camila wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle this herself, call the authorities, let the legal system work the way it was supposed to. But she had already learned that systems designed to protect people often failed the ones who needed protection most. The police hadn't helped when Marcus became controlling. Her insurance company had recommended Chun without bothering to vet him properly. Why would she trust that any one official would actually keep her safe? She looked at Dante Moretti, this stranger who had appeared in her life through the worst violation she could imagine, and tried to assess whether trusting him would be another mistake in a long line of terrible decisions. He seemed to sense her hesitation. "I have a secure location," he said. "Full security, my people watching the perimeter. You can stay there until we neutralize the threat. I won't pressure you for anything except your safety. You'll have your own space, your privacy, and my word that I will not let anyone hurt you the way Chin hurt my sister." "What are you really?" Camila asked. "You're not just a businessman. This office, the way you carry yourself, the fact that you somehow acquired evidence from a private buyer. What exactly do you do, Dante Moretti?" His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes acknowledged her perceptiveness. "I run various operations in Chicago. Some legal, some less so. I have resources that let me operate outside normal channels, and I'm not afraid to use them when the situation demands it." "So you're a criminal," Camila said flatly. "I'm someone who protects people when the legal system fails them," Dante countered. "I'm someone who makes sure predators like Chun face consequences even when they're too well connected to touch through official channels. And right now, I'm someone offering you protection because you're in danger whether you accept it or not." Camila closed her eyes, trying to think through the panic and violation and fear. She was alone in Chicago, no family closer than Kentucky, no friends close enough to burden with something this dark. Her apartment was a ground-floor studio with locks that wouldn't stop a determined attacker. She had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to. And something in Dante's grief-stricken determination made her believe he genuinely wanted to help. "Okay," she said, opening her eyes to find him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "Okay, I'll let you protect me. But I want answers. I want to know everything you know about Chun and his network. I want to understand exactly how bad this is." Dante nodded once, decisive and certain. "You'll have answers. All of them. But we need to leave now, before anyone realizes you were here. Can you walk?" Camila pushed herself up from the floor, her legs steadier than expected. Her entire world had shifted in the span of 20 minutes. But she was still standing. That had to count for something. "I can walk," she said. Dante moved to his desk, closed the folder with her photos, and locked it in a drawer with a key he pocketed. Then he shrugged into his suit jacket and gestured toward the door with a courtesy that seemed incongruous given the circumstances. "Stay close to me," he said. "We're going to walk out of this building like we're colleagues leaving together. Don't run, Don't look panicked. Just stay at my side. Camila picked up her forgotten delivery folder and fell into step beside him. In the elevator, surrounded by mirrors that showed her pale face and wide eyes, she caught Dante watching her reflection with an expression she couldn't quite read. Concern mixed with something else, something that made her acutely aware of how broad his shoulders were, how he positioned himself slightly between her and the elevator doors, like even here he was protecting her. When had she started noticing things like that? When had her panic shifted enough to register that he was attractive in a way that made her throat dry despite everything else happening? The elevator doors opened onto the building's lobby, and Dante's hand came to rest lightly on her lower back, guiding her through the evening crowd of workers heading home. His touch was warm even through her blazer, gentle but unmistakably possessive, like he was already claiming responsibility for her safety. They emerged onto the street where Chicago's early evening chaos swirled around them. Dante led her to a black SUV with tinted windows, opening the passenger door himself before walking around to the driver's side. The interior smelled like leather and expensive cologne, everything about it screaming money and power. As he pulled into traffic, Camila stared out the window at the city she had thought would be her fresh start. Instead, she had found violation and danger and a protection offered by a man who admitted to operating outside the law. Her life had been upended by a doctor she trusted and was now in the hands of a criminal she barely knew. She should be terrified. She should be planning how to escape at the first opportunity. Instead, she found herself stealing glances at Dante's profile, at the strong line of his jaw and the way his hands looked competent and sure on the steering wheel, and wondering if maybe, possibly, she had finally found someone who would actually keep her safe. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a building in the Gold Coast, and when the private elevator opened directly into Dante's home, Camila felt her breath catch for entirely different reasons than the fear that had dominated the past hour. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around three sides of the open living space, offering a panoramic view of Lake Michigan and the glittering Chicago skyline. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of amber and rose gold, making the city look almost beautiful instead of threatening. The furniture was modern and clearly expensive, all clean lines and quality materials, the kind of minimalist luxury that suggested both wealth and taste. It was overwhelming. The space itself was larger than her entire apartment building back in Kentucky, and the casual display of affluence made her acutely aware of the gap between her world and his. She stood just inside the elevator, clutching her delivery folder like it was a shield, suddenly uncertain about every decision that had led her here. Dante seemed to sense her hesitation. He moved past her into the space, shrugging out of his suit jacket and draping it over the back of a charcoal gray sofa. The gesture made him seem more human somehow, less like the dangerous stranger who had upended her life, and more like just a man coming home after a long day. "Guest room is down this hallway," he said, gesturing to the left. "Private bathroom, fully stocked. You can lock the door from the inside if it makes you feel safer. I won't come in unless you invite me." The casualness of his tone, the way he acknowledged her potential fear without making her feel foolish for it, eased something tight in Camila's chest. She followed him down a hallway lined with artwork that probably cost more than she made in a year, trying not to gawk at the obvious wealth surrounding her. The guest room was beautiful, decorated in soft grays and whites, with another wall of windows overlooking the lake. The bed was massive, piled with pillows that looked like clouds, and there was a sitting area with a comfortable chair and a small bookshelf. The attached bathroom had a walk-in shower with enough settings to pilot a spacecraft, and towels so plush they felt criminal. "I'll order food," Dante said from the doorway, maintaining a respectful distance. "Any preferences?" Camila realized she hadn't eaten since lunch, and that felt like a lifetime ago. "Chinese?" she said tentatively. "If that's okay." His mouth curved into what might have been the beginning of a smile. "It's your choice. Whatever you want." After he left, Camila sank onto the edge of the bed and finally let herself process everything. She had seen intimate photos of herself in a stranger's office. She had learned her doctor was running an exploitation ring. She had accepted protection from a man who admitted to being a criminal. And now she was in his penthouse, surrounded by luxury she had never experienced, with a view of a city that suddenly felt full of unseen threats. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs and forced herself to breathe slowly, the way her therapist back home had taught her during the worst of the anxiety after leaving Marcus. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. She had survived an abusive relationship. She had rebuilt her life once already. She could handle this too. The shower helped. Standing under water hot enough to turn her skin pink. Using soap that smelled like lavender and something earthy she couldn't identify, she started to feel almost human again. She had to put her work clothes back on afterwards since she had nothing else, but even that felt better once she was clean. When she emerged from the guest room, she found Dante in the kitchen portion of the open floor plan. He had changed into dark jeans and a fitted black Henley that somehow made him look both more dangerous and more approachable than the expensive suit had. His feet were bare, and there was something oddly intimate about that small detail that made Camila hyper-aware of the domestic nature of this situation. "Food should be here in 20 minutes, he said, pulling down plates from a cabinet. "Want something to drink while we wait?" "Water would be good," Camila said, moving to the breakfast bar that separated the kitchen from the living area. She perched on one of the high stools, grateful for the barrier between them even as she acknowledged the flutter of awareness in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. Dante poured them both water from a pitcher in the refrigerator, then leaned against the counter across from her. In the softer light of the pendant fixtures above the bar, his eyes looked more green than gray, and Camila found herself noticing details she had been too panicked to register earlier. The slight shadow of stubble along his jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead when he wasn't in full businessman mode, the breadth of his shoulders even in casual clothes. "You said your sister," Camila started, then faltered. "Earlier, you mentioned what happened to her. Can you tell me more?" Dante's expression shuddered briefly, pain flickering across his features before he controlled it. "Her name was Sophia," he said quietly. "She was 10 years younger than me, just 23 when she died. Bright, kind, studying to be a teacher. She went to a doctor for a routine problem, something minor like what brought you to Chun. The doctor took photos he said were from medical records. She trusted him the way you did." He paused, his hands gripping the edge of the counter hard enough that his knuckles went white. 3 months later, she got an anonymous email with some of the photos attached. No demands, no explanation, just the images. She was devastated. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, kept imagining who had seen them and what they thought of her. "I didn't know how bad it had gotten. She hid it from everyone, tried to handle it alone." Camila felt tears burning behind her eyes. "She died by suicide." "Pills," Dante said flatly. Left a note apologizing for being weak, saying she couldn't live knowing those images existed. "By the time I found out what had happened, by the time I started investigating, the doctor had already moved his operation. It took me months to track him to Chicago, more months to understand the scope of the network. Chun is one of 4 doctors I've identified so far, and he's the one who treated Sophia originally." The grief in his voice was raw and real, and Camila understood then that this investigation wasn't just about justice. It was about a brother trying to save other sisters, trying to prevent other families from experiencing the loss that had shattered his. "I'm so sorry," she said, inadequate words for enormous pain. "She must have been terrified." "She was alone with it," Dante said, and the self-recrimination in his tone was palpable. "I should have noticed. I should have asked better questions. I was too busy with my work, too caught up in my own world to see that she was drowning. That's not going to happen to anyone else if I can prevent it." "Is that why you do what you do?" Camila asked carefully. "The less legal operations you mentioned?" Dante met her eyes directly. "I grew up in this life. My father ran operations in Chicago before he retired, and I inherited the business. But after Sophia died, I started redirecting resources toward finding predators the legal system won't touch. Men like Chun who hide behind professional credentials and society's assumption that certain people are trustworthy. So you're like a vigilante," Camila said, trying to wrap her mind around it. "I'm someone who recognizes the world isn't fair and the powerful rarely face consequences unless someone makes them," Dante replied. "Is that vigilantism? Maybe. But I sleep better knowing I'm using my position to protect people instead of just enriching myself." The food arrived, delivered by someone who clearly knew Dante and didn't question the presence of a strange woman in his home. They ate at the breakfast bar, and the normalcy of sharing a meal somehow made the surreal situation feel more manageable. The food was excellent, and Camila found herself hungrier than expected, her body demanding fuel after the adrenaline crash. As they ate, Dante explained the scope of what he had uncovered. 4 doctors in the network, all operating in different cities. At least 36 buyers they had identified, ranging from wealthy collectors to people using the photos for blackmail. A system of encrypted communications and dead drop payments that had taken months to infiltrate. Chun is the linchpin, Dante said, pulling out a tablet and showing her files he had compiled. He's the one who started the network, recruited the other doctors, established the buyer relationships. Take him down and the whole operation collapses, but we have to be careful. He has connections with some dangerous people, including at least 2 organized crime figures and a city councilman. Camila stared at the documentation, seeing names and faces of other victims whose trust had been violated the same way hers had. How many women are there? She asked. From what I've been able to confirm, at least 47 across all 4 doctors over the past 5 years, Dante said. Probably more that I haven't found yet. Most don't know their photos were distributed. The ones who discovered it usually did what Sophia did, blamed themselves, and suffered in silence. We have to stop him, Camila said fiercely. All of them. These women deserve to know the truth, and Chun deserves to pay. Something shifted in Dante's expression, a flash of respect mixed with concern. That's the plan. But it has to be done carefully. If Chun realizes someone is coming after him, he'll destroy evidence and disappear. His buyers will scatter. We need to be strategic. Then tell me the strategy, Camila said. I want to understand the plan. I'm not just going to hide here and let you handle everything while my photos are out there. Dante studied her for a long moment, those storm-colored eyes assessing. You're not what I expected, he said finally. What did you expect? Someone more fragile, he admitted. Someone who would fall apart under this kind of violation. But you're angry instead of broken, and that's good. Anger is useful. I've had practice at surviving things that should have broken me, Camila said, thinking of Marcus and the slow erosion of her self-worth during those 2 years. I learned that falling apart is a luxury I can't afford. They talked late into the night, Dante laying out his plans while Camila asked sharp questions that seemed to surprise and please him. By the time exhaustion finally caught up with her, she understood that bringing down Chen's network would take weeks, maybe months. That she would be living here, in Dante's world, for the foreseeable future. The ground rules were simple. She couldn't go back to her apartment until they knew who else in the network might know about Dante's investigation. She could work remotely, but needed to clear any outside contact with his security team first. And she was to stay away from the windows during daylight hours, just in case anyone was watching the building. It should have felt like a prison. Instead, standing in the guest room doorway and watching Dante explain the security protocols with obvious concern for her safety, Camila felt something she hadn't expected. She felt protected. Actually protected, not controlled like with Marcus, but genuinely safeguarded by someone who seemed to care whether she lived or died. Thank you, she said quietly when he finished. For telling me about Sophia. For trusting me with that. Dante's expression softened in a way she suspected was rare for him. Thank you for trusting me. I know I'm asking you to put your life in the hands of someone you just met, someone who operates outside the law. That takes courage. Or desperation, Camila said with a slight smile. Both can be true, Dante replied. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start planning your role in taking these bastards down. After he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Camila lay in the enormous bed and stared at the ceiling. Her mind was racing too fast for sleep, cycling through everything that had happened. The violation, the danger, the unexpected attraction she felt toward her protector despite the circumstances. She could hear Dante moving around the penthouse, the soft sound of his footsteps on hardwood, water running in what must be his bathroom. The domestic sounds should have been comforting. Instead, they made her hyper-aware that she was in his space, surrounded by his things, protected by his resources and his dangerous capabilities. Hours passed before sleep finally came, and even then it was restless, filled with dreams of photographs and storm-gray eyes, and the feeling of a warm hand on her lower back guiding her to safety. When she woke to morning lights streaming through the windows, it took Camila a moment to remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back, and she lay there processing the fact that her life had fundamentally changed in the span of one evening. She was living with a mafia boss who was investigating her doctor for running an exploitation ring. It was the kind of premise that belonged in a thriller novel, not her actual existence. The smell of coffee drifted down the hallway, and Camila realized she could hear movement in the kitchen. She pulled on her wrinkled work clothes from yesterday and ventured out, following the scent like a lifeline. Dante stood at the stove, cooking eggs with the kind of casual competence that suggested this wasn't unusual for him. He had already showered, his hair still damp, wearing jeans and a soft gray t-shirt that stretched across his shoulders in a way that made Camila's mouth go dry. There was something deeply attractive about watching a powerful man do something as mundane as making breakfast. "Morning," he said without turning around, somehow sensing her presence. "Coffee is fresh." Mugs in the cabinet above the machine. Camila poured herself a cup, breathing in the rich aroma gratefully. "You cook," she observed. "My mother made sure all her children knew how to feed themselves," Dante replied, plating eggs and toast. "She said depending on others for basic survival made you weak." "Sounds like a practical woman." "She's a force of nature," Dante said with obvious affection. "You'll meet her eventually. She'll want to inspect the woman staying in my home." That casual mention of eventual meetings with his family, the assumption that Camila would still be here long enough for that to happen, should have worried her. Instead, it felt oddly reassuring, like he was already thinking of her as part of his life rather than just a temporary responsibility. They ate together at the breakfast bar, and the conversation flowed more easily than it had any right to given the circumstances. Dante asked about her work, seemed genuinely interested in her stories about navigating office politics and difficult clients. She asked about his legitimate businesses, learned he owned several restaurants and a security consulting firm that apparently provided cover for his less legal activities. In the morning light, with coffee warming her hands and the taste of perfectly cooked eggs on her tongue, Camila caught herself smiling at something Dante said. It shocked her, that moment of genuine lightness in the middle of everything dark. But when she looked up and found him watching her with an expression that was warm and almost tender, she realized he had smiled too. The awareness between them shifted, became something charged and undeniable. His eyes dropped to her mouth for just a fraction of a second before he looked away, clearing his throat and standing to collect their plates. "I have calls to make this morning," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. "Marco, my associate, will be here this afternoon with updates on the investigation. You're welcome to sit in if you want to be involved in the planning." "I do," Camila said firmly. "I want to be involved in all of it." Dante nodded, something like pride flickering in his eyes. "Then I'll see you this afternoon. Make yourself at home. Everything here is available to you." After he disappeared into what she assumed was a home office, Camila sat at the breakfast bar with her cooling coffee and tried to understand what was happening to her. Less than 24 hours ago, she had discovered the worst violation of her life. Now she was living in a penthouse with a gorgeous criminal who made her breakfast and looked at her like she mattered. It was insane. It was dangerous. And some part of her that had been numb since leaving Marcus was coming back to life, responding to Dante's presence in ways she absolutely should not be feeling about someone she barely knew. But she did feel it. The flutter when he was close. The awareness of his gaze. The safety she experienced in his presence despite knowing he was dangerous. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, this disaster was also an opportunity. A chance to find protection with someone who actually meant it, who would fight for her instead of controlling her, who saw her strength instead of trying to diminish it. Camila rinsed their dishes and stood at the windows overlooking the lake, watching boats cut white wakes across the blue water. Her life had been upended. Her trust had been shattered. But standing here in Dante Moretti's home, feeling safer than she had in months despite the dangers swirling around her, she thought maybe this catastrophe might somehow lead somewhere unexpected. Somewhere that included storm gray eyes and breakfast conversations, and the promise of someone who would actually keep her safe. 3 days into living in Dante's penthouse, Camila woke to the now familiar smell of fresh coffee and realized with a start that she had slept through the entire night without nightmares. That hadn't happened since the day she discovered the photos, maybe even longer if she counted the anxiety dreams that had plagued her for months before. She found Dante in the kitchen as usual, already dressed for the day in dark slacks and a white dress shirt he hadn't yet buttoned at the collar. The sight of that small strip of exposed throat and collarbone did something inconvenient to her pulse that she tried very hard to ignore. "Morning," he said, sliding a mug of coffee across the counter to her without being asked. He had learned after the first morning that she took it black with one sugar, and the fact that he remembered such a small detail felt more intimate than it probably should. They had fallen into a comfortable routine that felt shockingly domestic given the circumstances. Mornings started with coffee and easy conversation about inconsequential things, the news, the weather, the boats on the lake. Then Dante would disappear into his office for business calls while Camila set up her laptop in the living room, working remotely on her marketing campaigns while trying not to be too distracted by the view or the knowledge that a dangerously attractive man was just down the hall. Lunch was usually something simple that one of them threw together, eaten while discussing the investigation or Camila's work or stories from their vastly different backgrounds. Afternoons blurred together in a strange suspension of normal life, both of them existing in this bubble of forced proximity that somehow felt less forced with each passing day. Evenings were Camila's favorite time. Dante insisted on cooking dinner most nights, claiming it helped him think, and she found herself drawn to the kitchen to watch him work or help with simple tasks. There was something mesmerizing about his competence, the way he moved through the space with quiet confidence, the way his hands looked capable and sure whether he was chopping vegetables or sautéing garlic. They talked over dinner, long conversations that stretched into the night, about books and movies and childhood memories, about his family's history in Chicago and her small-town upbringing in Kentucky, about everything except the photos and the investigation, creating small islands of normalcy in the sea of violation and danger. And through it all ran an undercurrent of awareness that made Camila's skin feel too tight. The accidental brush of fingers when passing dishes, the way Dante's eyes would linger on her when he thought she wasn't looking, the heat that flooded through her whenever he smiled, which was happening more frequently as they grew comfortable with each other. She caught herself noticing ridiculous details, the way his jaw flexed when he was concentrating, the breadth of his shoulders under his shirts, the rare, genuine laugh that transformed his entire face from stern authority to something warm and alive. She was developing a dangerous attraction to her protector, and she knew it was probably just proximity and adrenaline and the fact that he made her feel safe for the first time in longer than she cared to admit. But knowing something was probably a bad idea didn't make her body stop reacting when he stood close enough for her to smell his cologne, something woody and clean that she was starting to associate with safety and warmth. That evening, after they had finished the pasta Dante made with an ease that suggested Italian grandmothers in his background, Camila found herself talking about things she hadn't planned to share. They had opened a bottle of wine, just one glass each, but it was enough to loosen the careful guard she usually kept on her past. "Can I ask you something?" Dante said, refilling her water glass. "You mentioned moving to Chicago for a fresh start, but you've been careful not to talk about what you were starting fresh from." Camila took a breath, weighing how much to reveal. But Dante had told her about Sophia, had trusted her with his grief and his motivation. She owed him the same honesty. "I was with someone back home," she said, staring at the wine remaining in her glass. "Marcus. We were together for 2 years, and for the first year it was good. Or I thought it was good. Looking back, I can see the warning signs I ignored." "What kind of warning signs?" Dante's voice had gone very quiet, controlled in a way that suggested he already suspected where this story was going. "Small things at first," Camila continued. "He wanted to know where I was all the time, got upset if I didn't text back immediately. Started suggesting I didn't need to see my friends so often, that they were a bad influence. Criticized my clothes, my job, the way I wore my hair. It was all framed as concern, as him wanting the best for me. So I convinced myself he was just protective. But it got worse," Dante said, not a question. "It got worse," Camila confirmed, surprised by how steady her voice remained. "He started checking my phone, showing up at my work unannounced to make sure I was really there. Got angry if other men talked to me, even customers or coworkers. He never hit me, but he made me feel small and worthless and like I was lucky he put up with me at all. By the end, I didn't recognize myself. I was anxious all the time, second-guessing everything I did, terrified of making him angry. How did you get out? There was something dangerous in Dante's tone now, barely leashed fury on her behalf that made her chest feel tight. My sister Natalie came to visit and saw what he had turned me into, Camila said. She literally packed my bags while Marcus was at work and drove me back to my parents' house. Helped me block his number, file a restraining order when he wouldn't stop calling and showing up. It took months to feel like myself again, to stop flinching at every notification on my phone. She looked up and found Dante watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. His hands were gripping the edge of the counter hard enough that his knuckles had gone white, and there was murder in his eyes that should have frightened her, but instead made her feel fiercely protected. If I ever meet this Marcus, Dante said softly, his voice carrying a promise of violence that was absolutely sincere, he will regret every moment he made you feel less than extraordinary. Camila felt heat flood through her that had nothing to do with the wine. The way he said it, like her worth was self-evident and Marcus's treatment of her was an offense that demanded retribution, made something crack open in her chest. That's why I came to Chicago, she continued, needing to finish the story before she did something stupid like reach across the counter and touch him. I needed to be somewhere he couldn't find me, somewhere I could rebuild without constantly looking over my shoulder. The job offer came at the perfect time. I moved here 6 months ago determined to be independent and strong and never let anyone make me feel powerless again. And then Chun violated your trust, Dante said, understanding flickering in his eyes. Right when you were learning to trust again. Camila nodded, feeling the familiar burn of tears but refusing to let them fall. The health scare was stress-related, anxiety manifesting physically. The doctor back home referred me to Chun because he was in my new insurance network. I was already vulnerable, already scared, and I walked right into another situation where someone used my trust against me. You didn't walk into anything, Dante said fiercely, moving around the counter to stand closer to her. Chun is a predator who targets vulnerable women. Marcus was an abuser who isolated and controlled you. Neither of those things are your fault, and neither of them say anything about you except that you survived and kept going. His proximity made her dizzy. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the genuine anger and concern warring in his expression. When had someone last defended her like this, with such absolute certainty that she deserved better? Thank you, she said quietly, for saying that, for meaning it. Dante reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered for just a moment against her cheek, and Camila felt that simple touch all the way to her bones. Anyone who made you feel less than incredible was a fool, he said, his voice rough. You're brave and smart and stronger than you know. I see it in the way you refused to fall apart when you saw those photos, in the way you demanded to be part of the investigation instead of hiding. That's not weakness, Camila. That's warrior strength. She didn't know what to say to that, didn't trust her voice not to shake if she tried to respond. So she just looked at him, at this complicated, dangerous man who somehow saw her more clearly than anyone else ever had, and felt the last of her careful emotional distance start to crumble. The spell broke when Dante's phone buzzed insistently on the counter. He pulled back with obvious reluctance, and Camila felt the loss of his proximity like a physical ache. Marco, he said, glancing at the screen. I need to take this. He moved toward his office, but this time he didn't close the door completely. Camila could hear his end of the conversation, and the shift in his tone was immediate and striking. The warm, gentle man who had just touched her face vanished, replaced by someone commanding and cold. I don't care what excuse he's giving you, Dante said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. He owes money, and he knows the consequences of being late. You have my permission to apply pressure. Make sure he understands this is his only warning. There was silence while he listened, then a dark laugh that sent shivers down Camila's spine for entirely different reasons than his tenderness had. If he's stupid enough to involve the authorities, remind him that his business partners would be very interested to learn about his creative accounting. I'm sure the IRS would be too. Handle it, Marco. I expect results by tomorrow. When he returned to the kitchen a few minutes later, Camila was washing their wine glasses, trying to process what she had just overheard. Dante leaned against the counter, watching her with an unreadable expression. You heard that, he said, not a question. I heard, Camila confirmed, setting the glasses in the drying rack and turning to face him. That was about your business. Your real business. Dante nodded, not bothering to deny it. Someone who borrowed money and isn't paying it back. Marco handles collections, among other things. It's not pretty, but it's necessary to maintain order. Order, Camila repeated. Is that what you call it? I call it reality, Dante said calmly. I operate in a world where reputation and fear are currency. People know that if they cross me or fail to honor their agreements, there are consequences. That knowledge keeps most situations from escalating to violence. But sometimes it does escalate, Camila said. To violence. Sometimes, Dante admitted. When people are stupid enough to push boundaries or think they can get away with disrespecting what I've built. I won't apologize for that. It's who I am and how I survive in this life. Camila studied him. This man who made her breakfast and talked about books and also casually ordered subordinates to apply pressure to people who owed him money. The contradiction should have bothered her more than it did. Instead, she found herself thinking about Sophia, about how the legal system had failed her completely, and how sometimes the only justice available came from people willing to operate outside the law. I'm not asking you to apologize, she said finally. I just need to understand what I'm getting into by staying here, by accepting your help. What you're getting into is protection from a network of predators who would hurt you to protect their secrets, Dante said, his eyes intense on hers. Yes, I do things that aren't legal. Yes, I've hurt people who deserved it, and probably will again. But I have a code, Camila. I don't involve innocents. I don't prey on the vulnerable. And I sure as hell don't let people like Chun get away with destroying lives. He moved closer, and Camila's breath caught at the intensity of his gaze. You want to know what you're getting into? You're getting someone who will use every resource at his disposal, legal or otherwise, to keep you safe and bring down the people who violated you. Someone who sees your strength and respects it. Someone who would burn down this entire city before letting anyone hurt you the way Marcus did or Chin did. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made something flutter dangerously in Camila's chest. She should be scared of him, of his casual relationship with violence and his admission of criminal activities. Instead, she felt safer than she had in years. Okay, she said softly. Okay, I understand. The next afternoon, Marco arrived with updates that shifted the investigation into higher gear. He was younger than Camila expected, maybe mid-20s, with nervous energy and intelligent eyes that assessed her quickly before focusing on Dante. We've identified 3 more doctors in the network, Marco said, spreading files across Dante's dining table. Boston, Miami, and Phoenix. All using similar methods. All connected to Chun through encrypted communications we managed to access. The buyer list has expanded to 43 confirmed individuals. Camila leaned over the table, studying the documentation with growing horror and anger. So many victims. So many women who had trusted medical professionals and been violated. Chin's getting nervous, Marco continued. He's increased security at his office and home, hired private security with military backgrounds. He knows someone's sniffing around even if he doesn't know it's us yet. We need to move carefully, Dante said, his jaw tight. If he destroys evidence or runs, we lose our chance to take down the entire network. What about the victims? Camila asked. Have you contacted any of them? Not yet, Marco said. Too risky. If Chin has anyone watching them, contact from us could tip him off. They deserve to know, Camila insisted, looking at Dante. They deserve a chance to be part of bringing him down. And they'll get that chance, Dante assured her, his expression softening slightly. But timing matters. We move too early. Chin walks away clean and just sets up somewhere else. They spent hours going over the evidence, plotting next moves, identifying weaknesses in Chin's operation. Camila insisted on being part of every discussion, asking questions that made both Dante and Marco look at her with growing respect. When Marco finally left as evening approached, Dante turned to Camila with something like pride in his eyes. You're good at this, he said. Seeing patterns, asking the right questions. You have a strategic mind. I spent 2 years learning to anticipate Marcus's moods and reactions, Camila said with a slight smile. Turns out that skill set transfers to criminal investigations. That night, neither of them could sleep. Camila heard Dante moving around the penthouse after midnight and finally gave up on the futile attempt at rest. She found him in the kitchen, staring out at the city lights with a glass of water in his hand. Can't turn your brain off either? She asked, and he turned with a slight smile that made her heart skip. Too much to think about, he admitted. Too many variables, too many ways this could go wrong. Camila moved to stand beside him at the window, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Want some tea? She offered. My mom always said it helps with racing thoughts. They moved around the kitchen together in comfortable silence, the kind of easy coordination that came from days of shared routines. Camila filled the kettle while Dante pulled down mugs, their paths crossing as he reached for the tea bags in the cabinet above her head. For a moment, they were too close, his chest nearly brushing her back as he reached past her. Camila froze, acutely aware of his warmth, his size, the way she fit perfectly in the space between his body and the counter. She heard his breathing change, felt rather than saw him hesitate. Then his hand was gentle on her shoulder, turning her slowly to face him. In the dim light from the city outside, his eyes looked almost black, and the expression on his face was something raw and wanting that made her breath catch. Camila, he said, her name rough in his throat. She didn't move, didn't breathe, waiting to see what he would do. His hand came up slowly, cupping her face with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his dangerous reputation. His thumb stroked across her cheekbone, and she felt herself lean into the touch involuntarily. The kettle's whistle shattered the moment. Dante pulled back immediately, putting careful distance between them while Camila tried to remember how to make her lungs work properly. He poured the tea while she stood there feeling unsteady, then handed her a mug without quite meeting her eyes. I shouldn't have done that, he said quietly. You're under my protection. Taking advantage of this situation would make me no better than the predators we're hunting. What if I wanted you to? The words escaped before Camila could stop them, bold and honest in the darkness. Dante's eyes snapped to hers, something fierce and hungry flashing through them before he controlled it. Then I'd say you're not thinking clearly. You're vulnerable right now, dealing with trauma. When this is over, when Shun is no longer a threat, and you have your life back, if you still feel that way, we can talk about it. The careful restraint in his voice, the way he was clearly fighting his own desire to protect her from himself, made Camila want him even more. But she recognized the wisdom in what he said, even if her body disagreed strenuously. They drank their tea in charged silence, standing on opposite sides of the kitchen island like it was a barrier keeping them both safe. When Camila finally said good night and retreated to her room, she could feel his eyes on her the entire way. The next morning, she woke worried that the almost kiss would make things unbearably awkward between them. Instead, she found Dante in the kitchen as usual, and when their eyes met over coffee, there was something new in his expression. Not awkwardness, but acknowledgement. They both knew the attraction was there, mutual and intense, and somehow naming it had eased some of the tension rather than making it worse. I'm glad you're here, Dante said simply as he handed her the coffee. I'm glad I'm here too, Camila replied, and meant it. She was falling for him, this complicated, dangerous man who made her breakfast and planned to take down an exploitation ring and looked at her like she was something precious. It was probably foolish and definitely complicated and might end in heartbreak. But for the first time since leaving Marcus, Camila felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with possibility. She was learning to trust again, not just Dante but herself, her own instincts, her own strength. And if those instincts said that Dante Moretti was someone worth the risk, someone who would protect her heart as fiercely as he protected her safety, then maybe this disaster had led her exactly where she needed to be. 1 week into living at the penthouse, Camila was in the kitchen attempting to make lunch when the private elevator chimed. She froze, her heart rate spiking before she remembered that Dante had mentioned his mother wanted to meet her. Still, the sudden intrusion into their private bubble made her acutely aware that she was wearing yoga pants and one of Dante's t-shirts that she had borrowed that morning because her limited wardrobe was running thin. The woman who stepped out of the elevator was small and elegant, probably in her late 60s, with silver threaded through dark hair pulled into a sophisticated twist. She wore a beautiful cream blouse and tailored slacks, and her eyes, the same striking green-gray as Dante's, swept over Camila with the kind of assessment that only mothers could manage. Dante appeared from his office immediately, and Camila watched something soften in his usually guarded expression. "Mama," he said, moving to kiss both her cheeks. You're early. I wanted to meet this girl before you had time to prepare her with warnings about me, Rosa Moretti said, her voice carrying a slight Italian accent and a wealth of warmth. Then she turned those perceptive eyes on Camila. So you are the one my son has been protecting. Camila, Dante said, coming to stand beside her in a gesture that felt protective and possessive at once. This is my mother, Rosa. Mama, this is Camila Reeves. Rosa moved forward and, to Camila's surprise, took both her hands in a warm grip. I am sorry for what was done to you, she said simply. My son told me about the doctor, about the violation of trust. This should never happen to anyone. The genuine compassion in her voice, the lack of judgment or pity, made Camila's throat tight. Thank you, she managed. Your son has been very kind. Kind, Rosa repeated, something amused flickering in her expression as she glanced at Dante. That is not a word people usually use for him. Terrifying, yes. Dangerous, certainly. But kind is new. Mama, Dante said, a warning in his tone that his mother completely ignored. Lunch was an unexpectedly pleasant affair. Rosa had brought food, of course, containers of homemade pasta and sauce that filled the penthouse with the scent of garlic and basil. While they ate, she told stories about Dante as a child, embarrassing anecdotes that made him roll his eyes but also smile in a way Camila had never seen before. Watching them together, seeing how his dangerous edges softened around his mother, Camila understood where his capacity for gentleness came from. Rosa was a force of nature, loving and fierce in equal measure, and it was clear she had shaped her son into a man who protected what he loved with absolute ruthlessness. After lunch, Dante excused himself to take a business call, and Rosa turned to Camila with those knowing eyes. Walk with me, she said, and it wasn't a request. They stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, the city stretching out below them like a glittering promise. Rosa was quiet for a moment, then spoke without looking away from the view. I lost my daughter 2 years ago, she said softly. Sophia. She was my baby, my light. When she died, something in Dante broke. He blamed himself for not seeing her pain, for being too focused on his business to notice she was suffering. He became harder, colder, more dangerous to his enemies, but also more distant from everyone who loved him. Camila didn't speak, sensing that Rosa needed to say this. But these past few days, Rosa continued, something has changed in him. When he talks about you, there is life in his voice again. When he looks at you, I see the son I thought I had lost to grief. You have given him something back that I feared was gone forever. The weight of that statement settled on Camila's shoulders. I'm not trying to replace Sophia, she said carefully. Of course not, Rosa said firmly. No one could replace her, and I would not want them to. But you are helping him heal, whether you realize it or not. He is protective of you. Yes, but it is more than that. He cares, truly cares, in a way I have not seen since before Sophia died. She turned to face Camila fully, and there was steel beneath the warmth in her gaze. My son lives in a dangerous world. If you choose to be part of his life, truly part of it, you must understand that danger will always be present. But I see how you look at him too, and I want you to know that you have my blessing. If you make each other happy, if you give each other strength, then the rest we can navigate together. The casual assumption that Camila would be choosing to stay in Dante's life, that this was already something deeper than protection and circumstance, should have felt presumptuous. Instead, it felt like permission, like Rosa was giving her approval for something Camila hadn't quite acknowledged she wanted. That evening, after Rosa had left with promises to return soon and pointed comments about how Camila needed proper clothes to borrow, Dante found her standing at the windows watching the sun set over the lake. I apologize for my mother, he said, coming to stand beside her. She can be overwhelming. She's wonderful, Camila said honestly. I can see where you get your strength from. And my stubbornness, Dante added with a slight smile. And my tendency to involve myself in other people's problems whether they want me to or not. They stood in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. The city lights began to flicker on below them, and Camila felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing against her chest. What happens after? She asked quietly. After Chun is dealt with and the threat is gone. What happens to us? Dante was silent for a long moment, and Camila held her breath, afraid of his answer. I don't want you to leave, he said finally, his voice low and rough. I know I should. I know the right thing is to let you go back to your life once you're safe. But the thought of you not being here, of not having breakfast with you every morning or hearing your laugh when I say something unintentionally funny, it makes me feel like I'm losing something I didn't know I needed until I found it. Camilla's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. I don't want to go, she admitted. I know it's only been a week. I know this started because of something terrible, but I feel safer and more myself with you than I have with anyone. Including before Marcus, before all of it went wrong. Dante turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes stole her breath. You're not just a responsibility to me, Camilla. You stopped being just someone I was protecting about 3 days ago when you challenged my investigation strategy and made me see angles I had missed. When you shared your story about Marcus and I wanted to hunt him down for making you feel small. When you didn't run from what I am, but try to understand it instead. Then what am I? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You're someone I care about, he said, reaching up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her ache. Someone I think about constantly when I should be focused on business. Someone whose smile makes me feel like maybe I'm not just the sum of my sins and my failures. Camilla leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them again, his face was closer, and she could see the war happening behind his eyes. Want and restraint, desire and responsibility, all battling for dominance. She made the decision for both of them, rising on her toes to close the distance between them. The first brush of her lips against his was tentative, a question, and for one horrible second she thought he might pull away. Then his control shattered. His hand slid into her hair, cradling her head as he kissed her back with a fierce tenderness that made her knees weak. His other arm came around her waist, pulling her flush against him, and Camilla melted into his strength with a soft sound of relief. The kiss was everything she hadn't known she needed. Gentle but commanding, slow but intense, full of barely leashed desire tempered by obvious care. He kissed her like she was precious, like he had all the time in the world to learn the taste of her mouth, like this moment mattered more than anything else. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante pressed his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that for days, he admitted roughly. But I needed you to be sure this wasn't just circumstance or gratitude. This isn't circumstance, Camilla said firmly. This is real. They stood wrapped around each other as the last light faded from the sky, and Camilla felt something fundamental shift between them. They had crossed a line they couldn't uncross, and she found she had no desire to try. The morning shattered their fragile peace with brutal efficiency. Dante's phone rang before dawn, and Camilla woke to his voice coming from the living room, clipped and furious in a way she had never heard before. She pulled on his t-shirt and ventured out to find him standing at the windows, his entire body radiating barely controlled rage. What happened? She asked, fear spiking through her. Dante turned, and the look in his eyes was murderous. Chen's people tried to break into your apartment last night. They ransacked it looking for evidence, for any indication of who might be investigating him. My people watching the building were able to stop them before they took anything, but it's clear the network knows someone's helping you. Camilla felt her blood go cold. They know about me. They know I'm the leak. They know someone's investigating, and they're trying to find out who, Dante corrected. But yes, you're now a confirmed target. Chen will assume you're working with authorities or have evidence against him. He'll want to silence you before you can testify. The clinical way he laid it out made the danger feel more real than all the previous discussions. This wasn't theoretical anymore. Someone had physically tried to get to her, would try again, and wouldn't stop until she was no longer a threat to their operation. Dante moved to her, his hands coming up to frame her face. I'm increasing security, he said. No more standing near windows during the day. Marco and 2 others will be on this floor at all times. I will not let them touch you, Camilla. I swear it. The fierce protectiveness in his voice should have reassured her, but Camilla felt panic starting to claw at her throat. Maybe I should leave, she said, the words tumbling out. Maybe I should just disappear, go somewhere Chen can't find me. I could start over again, change my name, just run. Dante's expression went very still. Is that what you want? To run? Camilla thought about it, really considered the possibility. She could take what little money she had saved and vanish. Go to some small town where no one knew her. Build yet another new life from scratch. Leave behind Chun and the investigation and the danger. And leave behind Dante. Leave behind the first place she had felt truly safe in years. The first person who made her feel strong instead of weak. Leave behind the possibility of justice for herself and all the other women Chun had violated. No, she said, the certainty flooding through her. No, running means he wins. Running means I'm never safe because I'll always be looking over my shoulder. Running means abandoning all those other victims who deserve justice. She stepped closer to Dante, looking up into those storm-gray eyes. I'm staying. I'm going to help you bring him down, and I'm going to testify against every single person in that network. I trust you to keep me safe, and I trust myself to be brave enough to see this through. Something fierce and proud flashed across Dante's face. He pulled her against his chest, his arms coming around her tight enough that she could barely breathe, and she felt him trembling slightly with the force of his emotion. You are the bravest person I've ever met, he said roughly against her hair. And I will tear this city apart before I let anyone hurt you. They stood like that for a long time, drawing strength from each other, until the initial panic faded into determination. When they finally pulled apart, Camila saw something new in Dante's eyes. Not just desire or protectiveness, but something deeper. Something that looked a lot like love beginning to take root. That night, neither of them bothered pretending they would sleep separately. After dinner, after going over security protocols until Camila could recite them in her sleep, after the fear had transformed into something else entirely, she found herself standing in Dante's bedroom doorway. He looked up from where he sat on the edge of his bed, and the question in his eyes was clear. I don't want to be alone tonight, she said simply. Dante stood slowly, moving toward her with deliberate care. Are you sure? He asked quietly. Because once I touch you, once we cross this line, I won't be able to pretend this is just protection anymore. I don't want you to pretend, Camila said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I want this to be real. He crossed the remaining distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face with a tenderness that made her chest ache. Then let me make something very clear, he said, his voice dropping to something rough and intimate. I'm going to touch you like you're precious because you are. I'm going to take my time because I've been thinking about this for days. And I'm going to make sure you feel exactly how much I care about you. Yes, Camila breathed, and then his mouth was on hers and thought became impossible. He kissed her slowly, thoroughly, like he was memorizing the taste of her. His hands moved from her face to her hair to her waist, each touch deliberate and reverent. When he finally lifted her and carried her to his bed, Camila felt cherished in a way she never had before. They took their time undressing each other, learning the landscape of skin and scars and sensitive places. Dante touched her like she was something miraculous, his hands and mouth worshipping every inch of newly exposed skin. And when she reached for him with equal wonder, tracing the hard planes of his chest and the ridges of old injuries, he trembled under her touch like she had power over him. Is this okay? He asked against her throat, his voice strained with the effort of restraint. Tell me if anything is too much. More than okay, Camila managed, arching into his touch. Don't stop. He made love to her with exquisite care, constantly checking in, making sure she was with him every step of the way. There was passion, fierce and consuming, but it was tempered by tenderness that made tears prick at Camila's eyes. This wasn't just physical. This was connection, two people who had been broken by life finding wholeness in each other. When she finally came apart in his arms, his name on her lips, Dante followed with a groan that sounded like surrender and victory combined. They collapsed together, breathing hard, limbs tangled, and Camila felt something settle in her chest that had been restless for as long as she could remember. Afterward, he held her close, one hand stroking slowly through her hair while his heart rate settled beneath her ear. Camila felt utterly safe, utterly cherished, in a way she hadn't known was possible. I'm falling in love with you, Dante said quietly into the darkness. I probably shouldn't say it yet, but I need you to know. This isn't just attraction or circumstance. You've become essential to me. Camila pressed a kiss over his heart, feeling it stutter beneath her lips. I'm falling too, she admitted. Probably have been since you made me breakfast that first morning and looked at me like I mattered. You do matter, he said fiercely. More than you know. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and for the first time since discovering the photos, Camila felt genuine peace. Morning came too soon, bringing reality back with it. But when Camila woke to find Dante watching her with soft eyes and a gentle smile, she knew everything had changed. They were in this together now, not just against Chun, but for whatever came after. The commitment between them was unspoken but absolute, written in the way he pulled her close, and she went willingly, in the way they fit together like they had been designed for exactly this. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. And somehow, that made even the danger feel bearable. 2 days after the break-in at her apartment, Dante called a meeting with Marco and his core team. Camila sat at the dining table surrounded by dangerous men who spoke in code and carried weapons openly. And instead of feeling frightened, she felt ready. The time for hiding was over. Chin's network was panicking, making mistakes, and that gave them the opening they needed. "We need to force his hand," Marco said, spreading surveillance photos across the table. "Get him to confirm the network on record. Once we have that, we can move on everyone simultaneously before they have time to scatter or destroy evidence." "How do you propose we get that confirmation?" Dante asked, his hand resting on Camila's knee under the table in a gesture that was becoming familiar and comforting. Marco looked at Camila, and she saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. "We need someone he thinks is vulnerable, someone he'll talk to thinking he can intimidate into silence." "Absolutely not," Dante said immediately, his entire body going rigid beside her. "You're suggesting using Camila as bait. That's not happening." Camila felt her heart rate spike, but she kept her voice steady. "What exactly would I need to do?" Marco glanced at Dante, clearly expecting to be shut down, but continued when Camila met his eyes directly. "You arranged to meet him in a public place, somewhere crowded, during business hours. You tell him you know about the photos, that you want them destroyed, or you're going to the authorities. You were a wire. He'll either try to threaten you or pay you off, and either way, he'll have to talk about the network to make the threat credible." "It's too dangerous," Dante said flatly. "Chun is already paranoid. If he suspects she's recording or that we're involved, he could hurt her right there in public." "We'll have 20 people in that location," Marco countered, posing as customers, staff, people on the street outside. "She'll never be more than 10 feet from backup. The second he makes any move toward violence, we intervene." Camila felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. This was what she had said she wanted, to be part of taking Chin down, to get justice for herself and all the other victims. But the reality of putting herself directly in his path, of confronting the man who had violated her trust so completely, made fear claw at her throat. She looked at Dante and saw terror in his eyes, barely leashed and completely at odds with his usual control. He was imagining everything that could go wrong, all the ways he might fail to protect her, and it was breaking him. "I want to do it," she said quietly, the words surprising her with their certainty. "I need to do this. I need to look him in the eye and show him that I'm not afraid anymore, that he didn't break me." "Camila," Dante said, his voice rough with emotion. "Please, there has to be another way." "Is there?" she asked, turning to face him fully. "Is there any other way to get the evidence we need quickly, before the network scatters? Before more women are victimized?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "If we do this," Dante said finally, his jaw so tight she thought it might crack, "we do it my way. My people, my security protocols," and she wears a panic button that brings everyone running the second she presses it. "At the first sign of real danger, we extract her whether we have the evidence or not." Marco nodded. "Agreed. We keep her safe above all else." They spent the next 6 hours planning every detail. The meeting would be at a popular coffee shop downtown during the lunch rush. Marco's people would pose as customers scattered throughout the space. Dante would be in a van outside with audio equipment, able to hear everything in real time. 2 men would be at adjacent tables, close enough to reach her in seconds. Camila would call Chin's office claiming to be a patient needing to discuss a sensitive matter regarding her medical photos. She would suggest they meet somewhere neutral, implying she was afraid to come to his office. The story was that she had discovered what he did and wanted the photos destroyed in exchange for her silence. "It sounds too convenient," Camila said, worry creeping into her voice. "Won't he suspect a trap?" "He'll assume you're scared and foolish," Marco said bluntly. "Women in your position usually are too traumatized to think strategically. He'll believe you're trying to handle this quietly out of shame. That assumption has protected his operation for years." The words stung because they were probably true. How many women had tried to confront Chen quietly, hoping to make the problem disappear through negotiation? How many had he threatened or paid off into silence? That night, Camila lay in Dante's arms, unable to sleep. She could feel the tension in his body, the way his hand kept moving restlessly through her hair, like he was reassuring himself she was still there. "Talk to me," she said softly. "Tell me what you're thinking." "I'm thinking about all the ways this could go wrong," he admitted roughly. "I'm thinking about Sophia and how I failed to protect her. I'm thinking about losing you and how I wouldn't survive it." Camila shifted to look up at him in the darkness. "You didn't fail Sophia. You couldn't have known what she was going through, and you can't carry that guilt forever." "I can't lose you too," Dante said, his voice breaking slightly. "I can't watch another woman I care about be destroyed by Chen's network. If something happens to you tomorrow because I let you take this risk, I'll never forgive myself." "Nothing is going to happen," Camila said with more confidence than she felt. "You'll be listening to every word. Your people will be everywhere. And I'm stronger than you think. Stronger than I thought, honestly." He pulled her impossibly closer, burying his face in her hair. "I know you're strong. That's not the question. But strength doesn't stop bullets or knives or any of the 100 ways Chen could hurt you if he realizes what we're doing." "Then we make sure he doesn't realize," Camila said simply. "We make him think I'm just another terrified victim, and we get what we need to destroy him." They were quiet for a long time, and Camila thought Dante might have fallen asleep until he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I love you," he said. "I need you to know that before tomorrow. Whatever happens, you need to know that falling in love with you has been the best thing in my life since losing Sophia. You brought me back from a dark place I didn't think I could escape." Tears pricked at Camila's eyes. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling right and true despite the short time they had known each other. "I love your strength and your grief and the way you protect people who can't protect themselves. I love how you make me feel brave enough to face my fears." They made love then with desperate intensity, clinging to each other like they could prevent tomorrow from coming through sheer force of will. And when they finally fell asleep tangled together, Camila dreamed of storm-gray eyes and safety and a future where the threat was gone and they could just be together without fear. The coffee shop was crowded when Camila arrived at noon the next day, exactly as planned. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, the wire taped to her ribs and the panic button in her pocket. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she forced herself to walk calmly to a table near the window where she could see the street outside and Dante's van parked across the road. Dr. Chun arrived 10 minutes late, clearly a power play designed to make her more anxious. He looked exactly as she remembered from her appointment, professionally dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt, his expression pleasant and concerned as he approached her table. "Camila," he said, his voice carrying that same reassuring doctor tone that had made her trust him initially. "Thank you for reaching out. I understand you have some concerns about your treatment." She forced herself to meet his eyes, to see him clearly for the predator he was instead of the medical professional he pretended to be. "Concerns is an interesting word for it," she said, keeping her voice low. "I know about the photos, Dr. Chun. I know they weren't just for my medical file." Something flickered in his expression, a brief flash of calculation before his concerned facade returned. "I'm not sure what you mean. All photos taken during your examination were standard medical documentation." "Don't lie to me," Camila said, letting anger color her voice. "I've seen them. In places they should never be. Being viewed by people who have no right to them. I know what you're doing." Chen's expression hardened slightly, and he leaned forward. "You're making serious accusations. Do you understand the legal ramifications of defaming a medical professional?" "I understand the legal ramifications of what you've done," Camila countered. "Distribution of intimate images without consent. Exploitation. Whatever else you call selling private medical photos to buyers who collect them." She saw calculation in his eyes, the shift from defensive to threatening. "What exactly do you want, Camila?" "I want those photos destroyed, every copy, everywhere they exist. I want my records expunged from your system. And I want to know I'm not the only one, that you'll stop doing this to other women." Chen laughed, the sound cold and entirely lacking in humor. "You're not in a position to make demands. Do you have any idea who my clients are? People with power, with connections. If you go to the authorities, you'll be putting yourself against individuals who can destroy your life with a phone call." "So you admit you have clients," Camila said, her heart pounding. You admit you're distributing these photos. I admit nothing, Chen said sharply. But hypothetically, if someone were running such an operation, they would have protection at the highest levels. Police commissioners, city council members, federal judges, people who would ensure any investigation disappeared before it started. And the other doctors, Camila pressed, forcing herself to keep going even though terror was making her hands shake. Are they protected too? The ones in Boston and Miami and Phoenix? Chen's eyes narrowed dangerously. How do you know about them? Because I'm not as stupid or alone as you think I am, Camila said, and saw understanding dawn in his expression. He moved faster than she expected, his hand shooting across the table to grab her wrist. You're wearing a wire, he hissed. Who are you working with? The panic button was suddenly in Camila's other hand, pressed before conscious thought. Everything happened at once. Men materialized from nearby tables, grabbing Chun and forcing him back into his chair. Customers who weren't actually customers surrounded their table. And through the window, Camila saw Dante burst from the van, his face a mask of fury and fear. He was at her side in seconds, his hands gentle on her shoulders even as violence radiated from every line of his body. Are you hurt? Did he hurt you? I'm okay, Camila said, though her wrist throbbed where Chun had grabbed her. I'm okay. Chun was shouting threats and denials, but it didn't matter. They had everything on tape. His admission of clients, his references to other doctors, his attempt to threaten and then assault Camila. It was enough. Get him out of here, Dante ordered Marco. Take him somewhere quiet where he can give us every name in his network. Every doctor, every buyer, every person who helped him build this operation. The look on Chen's face as he realized how thoroughly he had been trapped was satisfying in a way Camila hadn't expected. He had underestimated her, assumed she was weak and frightened, and that assumption had been his downfall. That afternoon and evening moved in a blur. With Chen's information and the evidence Dante had been gathering for months, they moved simultaneously on everyone in the network. Marco coordinated teams across 4 cities, hitting the other doctors and major buyers before anyone could be warned or evidence destroyed. Dante worked phones and computers, contacting authorities he trusted with documentation too comprehensive to ignore. By midnight, arrests were being made. Medical licenses were being suspended. Bank accounts were being frozen. The entire network was collapsing like a house of cards, and Camila watched it happen from the safety of Dante's penthouse with a fierce sense of vindication. But the victory was short-lived. At 2 in the morning, alarms started blaring throughout the penthouse. Dante was moving immediately, weapon in hand, shouting for Camila to get down. What's happening? She gasped, crouching behind the kitchen island. Someone's coming up, Dante said grimly. Multiple people. They bypassed the elevator security. The door burst open with explosive force. Men in dark clothes flooded in, professional and armed, and Camila realized with horror that this wasn't random. This was a coordinated hit. Dante moved with lethal precision, taking down the first 2 attackers before they could fully enter. His team materialized from other rooms, and suddenly the penthouse was a war zone. Gunfire. Shouting. The sound of bodies hitting expensive furniture. Stay down, Dante shouted at Camila, his focus entirely on the threats streaming through his door. Camila crouched behind the island, her hands over her ears, praying that this would end without anyone she cared about dying. She caught glimpses of the fight, saw Dante moving like violence personified, protecting his home and her with ruthless efficiency. It was over in minutes that felt like hours. When silence finally fell, bodies littered the floor and Dante stood among them breathing hard, blood on his shirt that she prayed wasn't his. Camila, he said roughly, are you hurt? She stumbled to her feet, her legs shaking, and went to him. No, I'm okay. Are you? He grabbed her, pulling her against his chest hard enough to hurt, and she felt him trembling. Too close, he said against her hair. That was too close. Who were they? Camila asked. Marco appeared from somewhere, a cut above his eye and his weapon still drawn. Recognition on one of the bodies, he said grimly. They work for Councilman Reeves, one of Chen's biggest buyers and most powerful protectors. Reeves is making a desperate play, Dante said, his voice cold and deadly. He knows we're taking down the network, and he's trying to eliminate the evidence. Trying to eliminate you. The finality in his tone made Camila shiver. This wasn't over. As long as powerful men were threatened by what she knew, she would be a target. But Dante's expression as he looked down at her was absolute and uncompromising. Reeves just made the last mistake of his life, he said quietly. No one comes into my home. No one threatens what's mine. Marco, find him. I don't care where he's hiding or who he thinks will protect him. Find him and make sure he understands that coming after her again means death. 2 hours later, word came that Councilman Reeves had been found in his office with evidence of his involvement in Chin's network spread across his desk. He would be arrested within the hour. The attack on Dante's home had been his last desperate attempt to silence the investigation, and it had failed spectacularly. As dawn broke over Chicago, Camila stood at the windows wrapped in Dante's arms, watching the city come to life. They were both exhausted, traumatized by how close death had come. But they had survived. The network was destroyed. Chun and his collaborators would face justice. It's over, Dante said quietly. It's finally over. Camila leaned back against his chest, feeling his heart beat steady and strong. Is it though? Are there others out there who'll come after me? Not anymore, Dante said with absolute certainty. Everyone involved knows now that you're under my protection, and they know what happens to people who ignore that protection. You're safe, Camila. Truly safe, for the first time since this started. She believed him, standing there in his arms, in his home that he had defended with brutal efficiency. She believed that he would keep her safe from anything and anyone who tried to hurt her. The nightmare was over. And somehow, through all the horror and violation and danger, she had found something she never expected. Love with someone who saw her strength, who valued her courage, who would burn down the world to protect her. It was over. And now, finally, they could begin. The days following the attack blurred together in a haze of police statements, evidence documentation, and the slow process of watching an entire exploitation network face consequences. Camila gave her testimony to federal investigators who assured her that Chun and his associates would spend years in prison. The other victims were being contacted, offered counseling and support, given the chance to add their voices to the prosecution if they chose. By the end of the first week, it was truly over. Chun was in federal custody, facing dozens of charges. The 3 other doctors had been arrested in their respective cities. Buyers were being prosecuted or fleeing to avoid charges. The councilman who had sent men to kill her was awaiting trial on attempted murder charges along with his involvement in the network. Every single person who had violated, enabled, or profited from the exploitation of vulnerable women was facing justice. Camila stood in Dante's living room looking out at the city and realized she could go home. Back to her apartment, back to her normal life, back to the fresh start she had been trying to build before all of this happened. The thought should have been appealing, a return to independence and normalcy. Instead, it felt like loss. You can go back to your apartment whenever you're ready, Dante said quietly from behind her. I had my people clean up the damage from the break-in, replaced anything that was destroyed. It's safe now. She turned to find him watching her with an expression that was carefully neutral, like he was trying to hide how much her answer mattered to him. What if I don't want to go back? She asked. Something flickered in his eyes, hope mixed with uncertainty. What are you saying? I'm saying that this place feels more like home than anywhere I've lived in years, Camila said, moving toward him. I'm saying that waking up next to you is the best part of my day, and I don't want to give that up just because the threat is gone. I'm saying I want to stay, if you'll have me. Dante closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to frame her face. If I'll have you? He repeated, something like wonder in his voice. Camila, I've been terrified that once you were safe you would realize you didn't need me anymore and leave. Having you here, sharing my space and my life, it's become essential to me. Please stay. Not because you need protection, but because we choose each other. I choose you, Camila said firmly. I choose this life with you, even knowing it comes with danger and complications. I choose us. He kissed her then, deep and claiming and full of relief, and Camila knew she was exactly where she belonged. Moving her things from the apartment became a symbol of something larger. Each box brought to the penthouse felt like she was building a life rather than just relocating possessions. Dante cleared space in his closet with an eagerness that made her smile, rearranged furniture to make room for her desk, insisted she decorate however she wanted because this was her home now too. 2 weeks after the network's collapse, Rosa invited them to a formal family dinner. The gathering was at her home, a beautiful brownstone in Little Italy that had belonged to Dante's parents for 40 years. When they arrived, Camilla was overwhelmed by the sheer number of people. Aunts and uncles and cousins filled every room, speaking rapid Italian mixed with English, the noise level somewhere between festive and chaotic. Rosa pulled Camilla into a warm embrace immediately. "Welcome to the family," she said simply, and the acceptance in her tone made Camilla's throat tight. Dinner was a production. Multiple courses emerged from Rosa's kitchen with military precision, each one accompanied by stories and laughter and good-natured arguments. Camilla found herself seated between Dante and his uncle Antonio, who regaled her with embarrassing stories from Dante's childhood that made him roll his eyes but also smile. As dessert was being served, Rosa stood and raised her glass. The room fell silent immediately, every face turning toward her with obvious respect. To Camilla, Rosa said, her voice carrying clearly, "You came into our family's life during a dark time, when my son was still lost in grief over losing Sophia. You brought him back to us. But more than that, you helped bring justice for my daughter and for all the women who suffered the same violation. You are brave and strong, and I am honored to welcome you as part of this family." The room erupted in cheers and raised glasses, and Camilla felt tears streaming down her face. She had lost her own family's closeness when she moved away, had felt adrift and alone for so long. To be welcomed like this, fully and without reservation, into Dante's loud, loving, chaotic family, felt like being given something precious she hadn't known she was missing. Dante took her hand under the table, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "More than okay," she whispered back. "This is everything." Later, after the dinner had dissolved into smaller conversations and children running through the house, Dante's cousin Maria approached Camilla with a shy smile. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "I saw the news reports about Dr. Chen. I was one of his patients 2 years ago. He took photos of me too, said they were for medical records. I never knew what happened to them, but I always felt violated by it. Seeing him arrested, knowing he'll face consequences, it gave me closure I didn't know I needed." Camilla felt her chest tighten. "How many women?" she asked. "How many of his patients went through the same thing?" "Too many," Maria said. "But because of you, he can't hurt anyone else. That matters more than you know." Over the following weeks, Camilla heard similar stories. Women reached out through the victim advocacy services that had been set up, wanting to share their experiences and express gratitude that someone had finally stopped Chun. Each conversation was painful, hearing how many lives had been damaged, but it was also healing. Her violation, as terrible as it had been, had led to justice for dozens of women and protection for countless others who would never become victims because the network had been destroyed. She was finding meaning in the trauma, transforming something that had been done to her into action that helped others. It didn't erase what happened, but it gave her a sense of purpose that felt powerful. 3 months after Chen's arrest, Dante told Camilla to pack a bag for the weekend. He was secretive about their destination, that small smile playing at his lips that meant he was planning something. They drove out of Chicago on Friday afternoon, heading south along the lake shore until the city disappeared behind them. Their destination turned out to be a private beach house, modern and elegant, situated on a secluded stretch of Lake Michigan shoreline. It belonged to Dante's family, he explained, a place they had come to every summer when he was growing up. The weekend was perfect. They walked the beach at sunset, cooked meals together in the open kitchen, made love with the sound of waves outside the windows. It was the first time since everything happened that they had been truly alone, without the weight of investigation or danger hanging over them. On their last evening, Dante led her down to the beach as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The sand was cool beneath her feet, and the breeze off the water carried the scent of summer and possibility. "I need to tell you something," Dante said, taking both her hands in his. "When Sophia died, I thought the best part of me died with her. I blamed myself for not saving her, and I turned that grief into something cold and hard. I threw myself into investigating Chen's network because it was the only thing that felt like it mattered, the only way I could make sense of what happened." Camilla squeezed his hands, seeing the emotion working in his expression. "Then you walked into my office and saw those photos," Dante continued, his voice rough. And suddenly I had someone to protect, someone to fight for. You gave me purpose beyond revenge. But it became more than that so quickly. Your strength, your refusal to let violation define you, your determination to help other victims even when you were still processing your own trauma. It reminded me that there was still goodness in the world worth protecting. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, and Camila's breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box. You brought me back to life, Dante said, dropping to one knee in the sand. You made me believe I could be more than my grief and my mistakes. You chose to trust me when you had every reason not to, and you choose me every day, even knowing the complications that come with my life. I love you, Camila Reeves. I love your courage and your compassion and the way you make me want to be better. Will you marry me? He opened the box to reveal a stunning vintage ring, all delicate filigree, and a central diamond that caught the setting sun and threw light everywhere. It was my grandmother's, Dante said quietly. The only woman my grandfather ever loved. She wore it for 60 years, and when she died, she left it to me with instructions to give it to someone who made me feel the way she made my grandfather feel. Someone essential. Someone who made life worth living. Tears were streaming down Camila's face, and when she tried to speak, the words caught in her throat. She managed a nod, then found her voice. Yes, she said, the word coming out part laugh and part sob. Yes, of course yes. I love you so much, Dante. You make me feel safe and strong and valued. You see all of me, even the broken, scared parts, and you don't try to fix me or change me. You just love me as I am. He slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then stood and pulled her into his arms. They stood on the beach holding each other as the sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. Sometimes I think about how we met, Camila said against his chest. The worst day of my life led me to you. If Chun hadn't violated my trust, if I hadn't walked into your office at exactly that moment, we never would have found each other. Maybe that's how love works, Dante replied, stroking her hair. It finds you in the most unexpected places, when you least expect it, but most need it. Do you think that's true? That sometimes the worst things lead to the best things? That fate puts people together for a reason? I think we find meaning where we can, Camila said. And I think choosing to build something beautiful out of something terrible is its own kind of victory. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony at Rose's church, surrounded by family and the few close friends who knew the full story of how they met. Camila wore a simple white dress and carried white roses, and when Dante saw her walking down the aisle, the look on his face made her cry before she even reached him. Their life together settled into a rhythm that was both ordinary and extraordinary. Dante continued running his operations, but Camila noticed him directing more resources toward legitimate businesses and causes that helped vulnerable people. She returned to her marketing job, but also started a non-profit organization dedicated to helping victims of medical exploitation and privacy violations, using her own experience and Dante's connections to build something meaningful. The work was hard and often emotionally draining, but it gave her purpose. Each woman she helped get justice or find healing felt like she was honoring her own trauma while preventing others from suffering alone the way Sophia had. 1 year after the night she discovered the photos in Dante's office, Camila woke in their bed with morning sunlight streaming through the windows and an unexpected wave of nausea. She made it to the bathroom just in time, and when the sickness passed, she sat on the cool tile floor and let understanding wash over her. Dante found her there 10 minutes later, his hair rumpled from sleep and concern immediate on his face. Are you sick? Should I call the doctor? I think I might be pregnant, Camila said, the words making it real. She watched emotions cycle across his face. Surprise, then joy so pure it took her breath away, then a flicker of fear that she understood completely. They had talked about children, agreed they both wanted them eventually, but the reality was different than the abstract discussion. We should get a test, Dante said, kneeling beside her on the bathroom floor. Make sure before we get excited. I already am excited, Camila admitted. Terrified too, but excited. The test was positive. So were the 3 more they took over the following days, unable to quite believe it. By the end of the week, they sat together on the couch with confirmation from her doctor and the knowledge that they were going to be parents. I'm scared, Dante admitted that evening. After Sophia, after almost losing you, I'm terrified of something happening to either of you. Camila took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. Nothing is going to happen, she said with more confidence than she felt. We're going to do this together, and we're going to be okay. For months later, they stood on the penthouse balcony in the early morning light. Dante's arms wrapped around her from behind, his hands resting on the curve of her growing belly. The city stretched out below them, the same view she had looked at that first terrifying night when she thought her life was over. So much had changed since then. The violation that had brought her to this place felt distant now, transformed from an open wound into a scar she carried with understanding and strength. Chen was serving 20 years in federal prison. The network was destroyed. Dozens of women had gotten justice and healing, and she had found love in the last place she expected, with a man who saw her strength and matched it with his own, who protected her but never tried to control her, who loved her fiercely and completely. Do you ever regret it? Dante asked quietly, walking into my office that night. Everything that happened after? Never, Camila said without hesitation. It was the worst moment of my life that led to all the best moments. You, us, this family we're building, the work we're doing to help other women. None of it would exist if that terrible thing hadn't happened. She turned in his arms to face him, the morning light making his eyes look more green than gray, and saw her own contentment reflected back at her. I spent so long afraid, she said. Afraid Marcus would find me. Afraid Chen's violation defined me. Afraid I would never feel safe anywhere. But standing here with you, carrying our child, living this life we built together from the ashes of trauma, I realize I haven't been afraid in months. You gave me that. Safety with someone dangerous, trust with someone who operates outside the law, love with someone I never could have predicted needing. You gave me life again, Dante replied, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. Purpose beyond revenge. Hope beyond grief. Every morning I wake up grateful that you chose me, that you stayed, that you saw past what I am to who I want to be for you. The baby kicked then, a flutter of movement that made them both laugh. Their daughter, they had learned 2 weeks ago, already making her presence known. She's going to be strong like her mother, Dante said, his hand moving to the spot where Camila had felt the kick. And protective like her father, Camila added. She won't let anyone push her around. They stood together watching the city come alive below them. Two people who had found each other through trauma and violation and danger, who had chosen to build something beautiful from something terrible. The penthouse that had once been Camila's refuge had become her home. The man who had offered protection had become her husband and the father of her child. The violation that should have broken her had instead led her to the place where she finally felt whole. It was over, that chapter of fear and violation and fighting for survival. What came next was the life they would build together, messy and complicated and absolutely real. Camila leaned back against Dante's chest and felt his steady heartbeat against her spine, felt their daughter moving inside her, felt the morning sun warm on her face. She had walked into a stranger's office terrified and violated, her trust shattered and her safety compromised. She had found protection with a dangerous man and love in the middle of trauma. She had fought back against predators and won. And now she stood here a year later, married and pregnant, and running a nonprofit that helped other victims find their own strength. The journey from that terrified moment to this peaceful morning had been harrowing and beautiful in equal measure. But standing here in Dante's arms, overlooking the city that had nearly destroyed her but instead gave her everything she needed, Camila knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single moment. Sometimes safety came from the most unexpected source. Sometimes trust had to be rebuilt from ashes. Sometimes the worst violation led to the greatest love. And sometimes, when you were brave enough to keep going after the world tried to break you, you found exactly what you needed waiting on the other side of the nightmare. She was safe. She was loved. She was home. And that was everything.